Hello and welcome to Atelier Sandrine Maugy. This week I'm going to give you a full tutorial of a glossy leaf painted wet on wet. So we're going to work on this camellia here, and I've just finished the leaf here, and that's the leaf that I'm going to paint with you in this video. So the whole project was a Patreon project a few years ago, so it was very long, it was over several hours. So I have put the footage from 3 different videos together and concentrated on the leaf. So you're going to have the full leaf as a tutorial today. If you have any questions or comments, please use the comments below. And if you like my tutorials, hit the subscribe button. Are you ready? Let's go.
As you can see, it's really raining today. That was refreshing, and it's still wet. But this is the leaf that I'm going to use here, because obviously this one, as I started the painting a while ago, is now like this, which is no good to anyone. The color's different, the texture's different, the shape is different. So I need a fresh leaf, and we're ready to go. So we're going to start with the shadows. So I'm going to put that leaf in a position where I have similar shadows. So I'm going to have some shadows obviously underneath the flower here where I've got the cast shadows, and I'm going to have some along the edge here and towards the tip where the leaf is falling away slightly towards the tip. And then I'm going to have the main highlights around the top here fading towards the tip. So I'm going to take quite a large brush, and I'm going to work my shadows in halves, half a leaf at a time. So I am re-wetting my shadow color and then putting some on the other side with more water, and that's the one I'm going to use. And the shadow color is Tallow Blue Red Shade, Quinacridone Coral, and Nickel Azo Yellow. And that's the same shadow color that I used on the flower. I'm going to use the same shadow color over everything so that they all look consistent. So, half a leaf. And I didn't finish painting my flower here because I want to finish the leaf before, because the flower is on top of the leaf, and it always makes more sense to paint what's underneath before what's on top, because it might be that with my shadow or my green I'm gonna eat away at the petal which is on top, and I'm gonna have to tidy that up. And if I do it after I finish the petal, it's a lot harder to do because there's a lot more paint on there, and also then I'll have to do it again and again and again every time I add a wash to the leaf. So I'm gonna do the leaf first, and then I'm gonna finish the flower. So first I've got some shadow underneath there, and I'm trying to avoid eating away at that petal here, keeping a neat edge, but it's not always possible. Things happen. So I said I'm gonna have some shadows towards the tip here, so that's what I'm doing now. And here this one has gone too far, so I'm gonna trail my brush where the vein is gonna be. To give a direction. To the paint, the direction it can dry in. And here I'm just gonna go a bit with the tip of my brush to lift a bit more. And you can lift as long as it's wet. You can usually lift. Now I don't want any shadows to come in the center here because this is gonna be a really strong highlight, so I've got to be careful with that. But under the mid-tones, it's okay if there's a bit of a intrusion. Now I've got a really nice softness to this, so I'm going to leave that now. I'm not going to touch it. I'm just absorbing some of the water here. And now I'm going to have to leave that to dry before I paint the other side. The first side is dried. Now we're back for the second one. So I'm still going to leave that little gap for the vein. But the vein is so fine, honestly, if you cover that gap accidentally, it's not that much of a problem. We can recover that later. So at the moment you've seen I've ignored the serrations. I'm just doing a broad wash of shadows. So starting at that end, and I'm not leaving a gap at that end because it's too fine. But there is a lot of shadow here. So I will go back to that with some serrations to show you two different ways of doing it. So on this side I'm going to do serrations after. On this side I'm going to do serrations as I go. And it's a bit harder to do it as I go because I don't have a lot of time. But I'm just using the tip of a brush and then straight away moving that into the body of the leaf. Making sure I'm going far enough that I don't get a line along the serrations. So the tip of my brush is the serrations. And they get less marked as you go towards, as you move towards the base. Of the leaf. And you can see I'm using a lot of water here because I need to have the time to do the serrations. Now there is the light is hitting that side, so I'm not going to go there. I'm just going to work my brush here in the direction of the veins, and then now that I'm pretty much done with the serrations, I'm going to drag the brush from there to the center and back. And what I'm doing here is that I'm absorbing some of the water that I have here because I don't need it anymore, and also I'm breaking the shadows with a clean line. So on this side I'm doing a lot more work straight away compared to the other side. And if your normal brush, round brush, is not enough, you can use a flat brush to lift what you need to lift. It's a lot more efficient. But be careful not to use it wet. You need to clean it but then pinch the water out, because if you add water at this stage into that drying wash, it is going to make a real mess. So you don't want to add water here. Okay, so I'm going to leave that to dry and then I'm going to add the serrations on the other side, so that way I will have shown you two different ways of doing them. Okay, my leaf is dried once again, so I am going to take two brushes, one number 0 to paint the veins with. Sorry, I'm looking for my other brush. And one number 6 to blend them in. So I'm going into my shadow color, and I've turned my page so that I'm looking in the right direction. And I'm going to start at the tip. And then I was just going to draw the serrations with my brush. And then with my damp, clean brush, I'm going to blend them in so that they don't just sit at the edge of the leaf. And it's a bit easier than doing them with the first wash because you have fewer things to worry about and a small area to work with. I'm only working the tip of my leaf here, not the whole leaf all at once. The danger of doing it that way is that if you've done your shadows too strongly with your first wash, you might have a line running through the edge, and then your serrations might look a little bit separated from the leaf. That could be a bit of a thing. And then I'm going to stop here because the next ones are going to be in green. There's not going to be so much shadows. So I'm just blending the last line I've done, following again the direction that my veins are going in. And I'm blending that far enough that the color doesn't creep up to make a hard line. And the next ones will be not in shadows but in green, so that's all I'm doing on that side. So I'm going to put that the right way up so you can have a look. At what it looks like. And you can see from the two halves the two ways of doing it. Either in the first wash of shadow, wet in wet while you're doing the whole leaf, or adding a little bit more shadows, a partial wash of shadows the second time and doing them the second time, blending them in as you go without having to worry about the rest of the leaf. You can practice both, see which one you like best, and then do it that way. So I've got to leave that to dry again, and then it's time for some green. Now the shadows are dried, we are going to do the first layer of green, and again we're going to work 1/2 of a leaf at a time, keeping that little gap in the center. Putting on enough water to give me time to work everything I want to work on there. And I'm going to start with covering the shadows with my mid-green color, which is quite bright. Not too much blue in there either. So covering the shadows, also doing the edge of the leaf, going into the little stalk. And here I'm gonna go on to the serrations that I've done earlier. And I'm also gonna go along the central vein. I'm gonna tidy that up with a damp brush so I don't get too much of a hard line. But where the paint is sort of doing a bit random things, you know, random shapes, I'm actually leaving those in because I quite like that. I think it's quite representative of how you get highlights on leaves. I've taken a smaller brush to go into my my veins, my serrations, and I'm gonna add some as well. I said I wanted to add some green ones, but I'm gonna use a slightly darker green here, that they show a bit better. So I'm transitioning between the shadows and the lighter bits with a mid green, and then I'm with a darker green, and then I'm moving in with my mid green for these ones. And that's enough for that one. Just dragging a bit of paint here to add a vein across the highlight, and then leave that to dry. Right, we're ready for the second half. Just as a reminder, my green mix, the medium green mix, is tallow green yellow shade plus nickel azo yellow and a touch of quinacridone coral to mute it down a little bit. And to that I've added tallow blue red shade to make it darker and slightly bluer. So the mid green is over here, and then I'm going to add some more of the darker one over the shadows. Right, ready for the other half. Leaving a little gap if you can. And making sure it's wet enough to work for long enough. It's going to take a while because there's all the serrations to work as well. So it's not a particularly fast wash. So I'm making sure I've got enough water on there. Right, starting with my mid green over the shadows. I always start over the shadows because then if it spreads too far, it's not so much of a problem. I'm going over all the serrations. Be very careful here because you want a neat edge. So you need to follow the same edge as you did with the shadows. Then I'm going along that little gap. And then I'm going to go along the edge of the leaf. Make sure I've got a nice edge. And I'm following the same veins as I've started before with the shadows. Now I need to add a few serrations here in my mid green. But they become less and less pronounced as you get towards the base of the leaf. Okay, just running my brush here, absorbing a little bit of the water. And it's time to add more paint. Ooh. I wasn't kidding when I said add more paint, was I? This is why I always start over the shadows. Wet in Wet is always a little bit unpredictable, which is part of the beauty of it. So I want to close in on those highlights a little bit because they're not going right to the edge. And then I'm adding some of the dark green here towards the tip where I've done my shadows. And then I'm going to use a bigger brush to tidy all of those markings here. Don't want a lot of lines. But I still need the veins to go across. And then I'm going with a clean brush. Okay, I'm going to move on to the flat brush to lift a little bit more, to break that green a little. Where the veins are going in. I have a sort of an accidental highlight here. I didn't plan that, but I actually quite like it, so I'm just gonna accentuate it. It's just happened on its own really, but I quite like the look of it, so. Okay, that's looking good. I'm going to leave that to dry and then go back to the first half. Time for another wash on the top side. Again, Wet in Wet for this one. Mid green. My washes are a little bit uneven on the two halves because I was a lot braver with that side than I was with this one, so I need to add quite a bit to this side to catch up. I also need to add some of the darker green underneath the petal there, which will do two things. It will show the cast shadow of the flower on the leaf, so it will add depth to the whole painting, but also it will make the color on top there really pop. So now with a bigger brush, I'm going to tidy up this feathering a little bit. Just bring them in line with the direction of the veins. And add more of the mid green. Actually, I could add more of the mid green here as well at the same time. absorb a bit of the water here if it's too much. And then with a smaller brush and the darker green, I need to add some colour to the serrations. Don't forget the serrations, otherwise they're going to look different from the leaf, the body of the leaf, and we don't want that. So paint the serration and then move the paint into the body so that they belong together. And then at the top here, again serrations, but this time with the mid green, not the shadow one. Need a bit more mid green here to do the transition between the midtones and the shadows. Okay, I think that's it for this wash. Now I'm going to leave that to dry and see how it looks compared to that and how it looks in balance. See if I need to add some to this side or if they look pretty even now. When it's wet, it always looks more vivid and stronger, so when it dries it might get down to the level of this one. The leaf has dried nicely and it's actually quite even, so I'm now going to start to do a wash on the whole thing to bring it back together properly. So I'm using a very big brush here, that's a number 12. It's quite big for a 12. And I'm just going to add water to the whole leaf and just do a wash over the whole thing before I start going in with some drier washes. So this is again a wet in wet wash, making sure that it's even, and it's a really big area to work on, so you need to make sure you have enough water on that to work the whole thing without the water starting to dry too soon. But at the same time, I don't want any puddles, especially towards the bottom here. As the water falls to the bottom along here, I need to make sure it doesn't collect a lot of water that are gonna make a puddle and make some backgrounds. Okay, that looks pretty even. So mid green, strengthening the color along the edge here. I'm keeping that sort of accidental highlight here. I'm not going to put any paint on that. And while this is still wet, I'm going to wipe along here because my highlight is getting a little bit covered here by the paint running down. We don't want that. But again, as long as it's still wet, you can lift fairly easily. And then the darker green will go underneath here. And towards the tip. And along the edge here, going to mix into the mid green. I'm leaving the two mixes to mix straight on the paper as well, to add some nice variations. And that is time to tidy up a bit. So across here, in here, and then keeping that highlight on the edge. And then here I've got a big gathering of water, which I need to absorb and get rid of. So just damp brush across it, it's enough to absorb the extra water there. And then quickly, before all of that dries, I need to go into my serrations. Otherwise I'm going to have a drying line between the main body and the serrations, so I need to make sure that the paint really goes into each one of these. And I think that's going to be enough for the wet in wet work. So the whole leaf is completely soaking now. So I am going to leave that to dry for at least, I would say, about 20 minutes to half an hour. And then we're going to start some dry brush on there. And today we're going to finish the leaf. So we've done the first couple of wet in wet washes in there. And now we have to finish it. There's quite a good build-up of color with those washes, so I don't need to do too much more to it. But we need to do the veins and then a little bit of dry brush work to bring it all together and add the details. So the first thing I'm going to do is the veins with a very small brush. And for that, I am going to use a very pale green mix of the tallow green yellow shade and the nickel azo yellow, which are two colors that I've used already in my mixes. And it's going to make a very pale green, which is quite good for the veins. If I dilute it, it's the same color. So I'm going to start with the vein in the center, and I'm gonna color in the stalk, which is very pale, and then I'm gonna continue on from there. And it more or less disappears towards the tip. It gets smaller and smaller. I'm also going to use my little flat brush to lift a bit of the darker green here that's gone over. And I'm also going to lift a little bit towards the tip. I've got a bit of a build-up of dark green as I did the washes on both sides, and they overlapped a little, so I'm just lifting that. I don't want to remove all color on there, I just want to remove that build-up and make a cleaner line. For my veins. Okay. And then if the green from the vein goes into the body of the leaf, it doesn't matter. Just add a bit of color. So I already have a hint of veins here that I did wet in wet. So I'm gonna follow these. I've got a first one here, the second one goes towards the edge. This first one joins the second one, and I'm just going to draw them all over the leaf. So I'm going to accelerate that a little bit because it's going to be a bit boring to watch all of it. Okay, now I've marked the veins. I am going to add a little bit of color on one side of them. So my light is coming from the left. So the left side of the veins is going to have a little bit of color to them, while the right side is going to be in full light. But I don't want to add a lot of color because remember, I'm working in my highlights here most of the time. So it's not a massive build-up of color. And I'm working to the edge of the vein. And I'm working with my mix, which is the mid green. And I'm not working wet in wet anymore, but I'm still blending. And remember here I had that accidental highlight that I quite like, so I am keeping that. Well, I'm trying to keep it. We'll see how that goes. And I'm not doing every single vein on there. I'm doing the main ones. I don't do botanical illustration. I do botanical painting, which means that I do keep a bit of artistic license and I don't do every single thing that happens there. I try to still keep it looking like a painting rather than a photograph. So that's all blended. I'm going to leave that alone for now because it's all a little bit wet. I'm going to move further up. And as I go over the shadowed areas, I'm using a slightly darker green mix so that it shows, otherwise it's not going to show. It's important to blend straight away so that you don't get a hard line. The vein itself is a hard line, but the colors and the shadows around it are not. You have to keep it soft. And if you add more color to any part like this, you have to leave a little fine line where you did the vein, so that that little fine line cuts across the color and gives a bit of a lighter mark where the vein is. Right, I am going to do the same on the other side of the leaf, and then I will come back to show you the result. I have done the same on this half as I did on this one, so I've left quite a big highlight because my light coming from here is hitting that leaf quite a lot. I've managed to keep the accidental highlight on the side here. I've got my veins in a lighter green. I've got my serrations okay, and I've got a variation of greens which are all variations of Nicolazo yellow, tallow green yellow shade, and a bit of tallow blue red shade when I want the shadows to be deeper and the green to be bluer. So I've added a little bit of texture with my dry brush, then with a damp brush I just soften it up a little bit so that it's not too dry and too sharp, and the only hard lines on there are the veins. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to use the comments under the video and I will answer them. See you next time. Happy painting. Bye.